Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gautama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/supportbuddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our group learning program, and we're studying the 5 hindrances to enlightenment and the 7 factors of enlightenment. This is going to help you to identify when there are certain obstructions or hindrances to your progression to enlightenment, and then helping you to learn how to apply a remedy or antidote to resolve this obstruction or this hindrance that is blocking you from getting to enlightenment. This is our last Sunday class of the entire group learning program before we restart next week from the very beginning of the group learning program on the 13th of August. So I'd like to welcome all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you've been joining regularly. I'm going to help you to understand what these 5 hindrances are and how to actually eliminate them. And I'm going to help you to understand the 7 factors of enlightenment, which are what's going to help you to eliminate these, among other aspects of your practice that you will need to develop and cultivate in order to eliminate these. As we go in today's class, you're welcome to ask any and all questions that you like. You can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom in the comment section, and I'll be able to see your questions there. Or if you're in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. So let's first look at some words of the Buddha related to the 5 hindrances. The Buddha spoke at different times about different topics, and he spoke about the 5 hindrances at different times. But here is just a very beginning introductory teaching related to the 5 hindrances. I'm going to help you to understand this so that then we can move into actually describing the 5 hindrances and all the other aspects of today's class that you're going to need to understand in order to overcome these 5 hindrances. Oftentimes, I'm using the words of the Buddha to help you see exactly what he taught and what he didn't teach, so that then you can have confidence in the teachings that are being shared with you, that you can learn them, reflect on them, and then practice them in order to train the mind. So these are the words of the Buddha as an introductory to the 5 hindrances, but there's other places in his teachings where he discusses them in more detail. Here he says, "Monks, there are these 5 hindrances." What 5? The hindrance of sensual desire, the hindrance of ill will, the hindrance of complacency, the hindrance of restlessness and worry, the hindrance of doubt. These are the 5 hindrances. This noble eightfold path is to be developed for direct knowledge or experience of these 5 hindrances, for the full understanding of them, for their complete destruction, for their abandoning. So this is how you start to get introduced into the teachings of the Buddha, is start to learn through his own words. And here you can see that he's introducing students to the 5 hindrances, of what they are and what the solution is, which is the Eightfold Path. But there's more detailed solutions to each one of these hindrances. In order to understand the solutions to the 5 hindrances, you need to first understand kind of the 5 hindrances in general, what they are and what they're communicating to you. Then we'll go into talking about the 7 factors of enlightenment, which will be tools that you will need in order to fine-tune the mind and eliminate these 5 hindrances. Then we will actually talk about the 5 hindrances and the remedies themselves. So the 5 hindrances have similarities to the 10 fetters. If you've been learning the teachings of the Buddha and you've learned the 10 fetters, then what you'll understand about those 10 fetters is they're 10 individual pollutions or taints or defilements. What a fetter is a shackle around your ankle with a chain and a ball, just like it keeps a prisoner trapped. These 10 fetters in the mind are keeping one trapped in the unenlightened state. And in order to get to enlightenment, you would need to eliminate all the 10 fetters. And that's what's going to ultimately help you to be able to get to enlightenment and awaken the mind to that peacefulness, the calmness, the serenity, the contentedness, and the joy, the brightness and radiance of the enlightened mind. So it's the 10 fetters that you're working to eliminate, and the Buddha describes those as part of his teachings. But there's some similarities between the 10 fetters and the 5 hindrances. Out of the 5 hindrances, 4 of them are part of the 10 fetters as well, but we're talking about them in a different way. And this is common in the way that the Buddha often talked about his teachings. There were these direct and indirect ways that the teachings were kind of pointing to each other. Through learning and practicing the Eightfold Path while eliminating the 10 fetters to include using the 7 factors of enlightenment, this will eliminate the 5 hindrances, but it's helpful to understand what they are in detail and what the remedies are. And as I mentioned, sometimes these teachings are indirectly or in direct ways referring to each other. So if you look at something like mindfulness shows up on the Eightfold Path, it shows up in the 7 factors of enlightenment, and it shows up in other teachings as well, because it's so important that one is practicing mindfulness. So you'll see this connection between the teachings, either directly or indirectly. You've seen that already with the 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths, the Eightfold Path, and the 5 precepts, how these teachings are all interconnected. Well, the Buddha is doing the same thing here with the 10 fetters, explaining these are the 10 things that are keeping the mind in the unenlightened state. But then with the 5 hindrances, these are the 5 things, the top 5 things that are obstructions to you actually progressing to eliminate the 10 fetters and actually experience enlightenment. If there are struggles and impediments on the path to enlightenment, it's helpful to understand these 5 hindrances individually and apply the individual solutions, which can be applied to remove the hindrance or this fetter or this taint. And this will help create progress on the path. So these 5 hindrances, I'm pretty sure that the average individual is going to have all 5 of these. I'm sure there's certain people that don't necessarily have one of these 5 hindrances when they first start the path to enlightenment, but by and large, you're going to see these 5 hindrances at some point in your progress to enlightenment. So that's why it's very important that you understand what they are and how to remedy them. Because then when you observe that they're arising in the mind and they're obstructing you and hindering you from getting to enlightenment, you'll know what the solutions are. And you can always reach out to your teacher and get help. You can always consult books and things like this. But the more wisdom that you cultivate about the path to enlightenment, then you'll be more self-sufficient and able to observe the condition of the mind and then apply the remedies. The first aspect of understanding the 5 hindrances and what those solutions are to eliminate them is to understand the 7 factors of enlightenment. I introduced students to this in the group learning program back in chapter 3, but now we're going to go through it in detail so that students can understand what they are and how to practice them, because an enlightened being is going to be practicing the 7 factors of enlightenment. Some people think that the 7 factors of enlightenment are to determine if you are enlightened or you aren't enlightened. That's not what the 7 factors of enlightenment are. Instead, they are tools or techniques to fine-tune the mind and bring it to the middle where the mind can be functioning optimally in this enlightened mental state. So this first factor of enlightenment that we're using in order to fine-tune the mind is called mindfulness. And we discuss this in other parts of this program as it relates to the Eightfold Path and other aspects of your journey to enlightenment. But just as a reminder, understand that mindfulness is awareness of mind as described in the Eightfold Path as right mindfulness. There, I introduce students to mindfulness as just general awareness of the mind, having awareness of the mind. Oftentimes, this word is used in modern language. It's made its way into modern language, but it's oftentimes being used in a way that the Buddha didn't necessarily use it. You might see people using it in common day in average conversations where someone might say, can you mindfully carry this glass of water to the table? And what they're really saying is, can you carefully carry this glass of water? So oftentimes people are using this word in ways that the Buddha didn't intend it to be used, and not the way that the Buddha used it. So it's important that you understand how the Buddha used it, which is awareness of the mind. In order to purify the mind to get to enlightenment, you need to be aware of what's going on in the mind, because there's certain unwholesome qualities that you're going to need to eliminate, and there's certain wholesome qualities that you're going to need to cultivate. So you train the mind through breathing mindfulness meditation and through practicing mindfulness in daily life to have this awareness of mind. But more specifically, you're going to need to develop the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which I'm going to talk about at the end of the class. So mindfulness is utterly important and should be practiced all the time, not just in meditation, but throughout your daily life. You should be practicing awareness of mind. That's what's going to help you to be aware of what's going on in the mind, so that you can then take action or effort to be able to eliminate certain unwholesome qualities and arise certain wholesome qualities. Then we've got the enlightenment factor of investigation, energy, and joy. These are grouped together for a reason, because as the mind is experiencing a dullness, a lethargic condition, complacency, or otherwise just unmotivated and lacking enthusiasm, what you would like to do is practice the enlightenment factor of investigation, energy, and joy. These are going to spring up in the mind if you apply effort to be able to cultivate them. So where you see the mind is dull and lethargic, and the last thing you're thinking about doing is picking up a book about the teachings of the Buddha, or coming to class, or consulting with your teacher to get guidance, instead, if you're practicing the enlightenment factor of investigation, then you're having dedicated examination and exploration, or research and study and questioning to learn the teachings. You need to roll up the sleeves and dive in and sink your teeth into the teachings. Through investigating the teachings, this will help you to increase the mind's energy, that now you'll have this enlightenment factor of energy that will arise in the mind, where you'll have interest to apply effort, determination, ambition, initiative, motivation, some vigor and enthusiasm, or a willingness to do something. And that comes from investigating the teachings, that as you investigate the teachings and the Buddha is giving you the answers of why your mind is experiencing what it's experiencing, then you might start observing this energy arise in the mind. And then as that's occurring and you're starting to now practice the teachings through the energy that you're applying and this willingness to do something, now you'll see this enlightenment factor of joy starting to arise, that the mind can be pleased and delighted, not associated with any specific object. Or another way to think about it is unconditioned gladness, where the practitioner isn't attaining it by craving, desire, attachment, but it's just there. It's just on. It's not arising, changing, and fading away, but instead it's just on. And this comes from the investigation, energy, and then the joy will start springing up in the mind. And this helps bring the mind out of that sluggish, lethargic state into the middle. Then you'll also notice with that mindfulness, not only do you experience this complacency or this dull and lethargic state that you need to apply investigation, energy, and joy to, but with that mindfulness or awareness of mind, you might also notice that your mind is in this excited or elated state, and you're trying to bring it down and calm it down and bring it into the middle. This is where the next 3 factors of enlightenment are for, in order to fine-tune the mind and bring it into the point where it can be in the middle. This is tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. What the enlightenment factor of tranquility is to train the mind to come to this relaxed, steady, stable, peaceful, and still mind. You need to apply the effort to bring in this tranquility when you see the mind in this excited, elated state. Because in that excited, elated state, the mind is shaken up, it's uncalm, it's unsteady. So by bringing in the tranquility, this will bring the mind to a period of stableness and peacefulness and stillness. And then you can practice the enlightenment factor of concentration, where there's mental alertness and attentiveness, ability to give your full attention or thought to a single object or activity. This is where we talked about concentration as part of the Eightfold Path, which is practicing singleness of mind, where you're focused on just a single task or a single activity. When you're in meditation, doing breathing mindfulness meditation, you're focused on the breath. But in daily life, you would also like to practice singleness of mind. That when you're eating, you're just eating. Or when you're watching TV, you're watching TV. Or when you're talking on the phone, you're talking on the phone. But what we tend to do if we've been misled and our mind has confusion or misunderstanding or unknowing of true reality, you might be trying to multitask where you're rapidly cycling from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing to thing to thing. The mind can't actually do 2, 3, 4, 5 things at a time. The human mind can only be in one place at a time. But oftentimes, if you've been taught to multitask, you might be actually rapidly cycling, doing one thing for 3, 4, 5, 10 seconds, rapidly cycling to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And then when you're by yourself and you're maybe sitting quietly, you have a really hard time relaxing. You might find that there's stress or anxiety in the mind because you're hindered from being able to be calm and still and concentrated because the mind is overactive. You might even find that when you are trying to multitask, and even when you're not trying to multitask, your mind is still somewhere else. You might be in a conversation, but your mind's thinking about something else. Or you might be in a business meeting and your mind's thinking something else. And in these situations, you're going to make mistakes and you're going to lack clarity and focus in your conversations and your business meetings and whatever activity or task that you're doing. If you're hitting nails with a hammer, you might hit your thumb when your mind is thinking about something else. Or if you're cutting tomatoes, you might accidentally cut yourself because your mind's drifted off to something else rather than just focus on cutting the tomatoes. So you need to arise this concentration in the mind where you're focused on just a single object or a single activity. Training the mind and exercising that way in meditation, but then in daily life, practicing that on an ongoing, consistent basis. And then when you're practicing this tranquility where you've relaxed the mind and then you've started to practice the enlightenment factor of concentration where you're focusing the mind, then you would like to bring in the equanimity, the mental calmness and composure, the evenness of temper, especially in a difficult situation. This is what's going to bring the mind out of that excited, elated state down into a calm state. And this is how you train the mind and you fine tune it. So your mindfulness is always useful. That's the first factor here of the 7 factors of enlightenment. And then when you observe that the mind's dull and lethargic, you lift it up by practicing the enlightenment factor of investigation, energy, and joy. And when you observe with that mindfulness that the mind's excited or elated, you bring the mind down into this calmness and composure with tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. Essentially what you're doing is it's this analogy that I've used in the past where you have a piece of wood and you have a piece of steel and you're grinding that back and forth on the piece of wood. When you first start grinding back and forth, it's really easy for the steel to pop out of this groove because there's not really a groove there yet because you've just started to grind this steel back and forth. But the more you grind that steel back and forth on the wood, you'll get a deeper and deeper groove, and eventually it's very hard for that steel to pop out because you've got such a deep groove. And when it does pop out, you'll know it's popped out and you'll be able to easily bring it back right away. Eventually that groove gets so deep that the steel won't pop out. And the same thing is true about your mind, that if you practice this mindfulness and awareness of mind, and where you see it's complacent and lethargic, if you lift it back up, or if you see it's excited or elated and you bring it down into the middle, more and more as the mind stays in the middle, it'll just stay there all the time. It won't pop out. But you need to get more and more practice of keeping the mind in the middle, doing that through meditation, but also in your daily life. You need to be actively practicing the 7 factors of enlightenment, being aware of the mind with mindfulness, that when it's complacent or excited, then you'll know which factors of enlightenment to invoke and bring in to fine tune the mind and bring it to the middle. And then more and more, it'll just stay right there in the middle. It'll be effortless. But it takes time to train the mind to do that. And you can't be complacent in your practice. So your practice is meditation, yes, but your life practice that you're developing is a full-time job. When you're in daily life, you would like to apply effort to observe the mind with mindfulness and then apply the particular factors of enlightenment that you need. So I'm going to pause here and see if there's any questions that you guys might have related to the little introduction to the five hindrances and then this teaching on the 7 factors of enlightenment. If you have any questions on these, let me know by putting those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or raise your hand in Zoom and I'll answer any questions that you have. All right, I'm not seeing any questions here from anybody. So let's move on in our class today to discuss the 5 hindrances. I'm going to be describing what each one of these hindrances are and then how to actually eliminate them. So this first one is called central desire. This is also part of the 10 fetters. What central desire is where the unenlightened mind is longing and yearning through the sense spaces, trying to have agreeable contact permanently. It wants to have certain contact through these sense spaces, and if it gets what it wants, it gets pleasant feelings. And if it doesn't get what it wants, it gets painful feelings. And it's doing this through the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. So far in this program, we've been mainly talking about craving, desire, attachment generally. But more specifically, what the mind is doing is it's longing through these doorways, through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and the mind itself, these 6 sense bases. It's longing through the eyes because it wants agreeable contact. And if it gets things that are agreeable, then the mind can experience happiness or excitement or elation or thrill, exhilaration, euphoria. But because of craving being in the mind, if it encounters contact with disagreeable forms through the eyes, then the mind will experience painful feelings. So let me give you an example. If you're outside in your city and you see a child and a parent walking down the street holding hands together, that might be agreeable to you. And when you see that, it's like, that's so lovely. I feel so happy seeing that child walk so nicely with their parent. But then if you walk a little bit further and you turn the corner and you see a parent slap their child across the face, well, now that might be disagreeable to you. And now you might experience painful feelings, which is like frustration, irritation, annoyance, or maybe even anger or sadness or some other discontent feeling. This is because the mind is longing through the sense base of the eyes, having certain cravings of wanting to see something that's permanently agreeable. And when you get what you agree with and you have that contact through the eyes, there's pleasant feelings. But when you have that disagreeable contact through the eyes, you get the painful feelings. And in this example, I'm not talking about what's right or wrong or what's wise or unwise in terms of the parent, because obviously slapping a child across the face is very unwise and I would never do that. But what I'm describing here is what's causing your mind to be discontent, is that it's this central desire. The mind is longing, yearning through the sense bases. And it's not just the eyes, it's the ears and the nose and the tongue and the body and the mind itself. So the eyes want to see permanently agreeable forms, but when it sees disagreeable forms, that's when the painful feelings come in. Or the ears want to hear a permanently agreeable sound, but when it hears disagreeable sounds, then the mind experiences the painful feelings. The nose, the mind is longing, yearning through the nose due to craving, wanting permanently agreeable contact through odors that come into the nose. But it can't experience that because of impermanence. It's not possible to permanently experience permanently agreeable odors or these other aspects of the 6 sense bases, like flavors on the tongue or physical objects on the body or mental objects in the mind. So if the mind is longing, yearning for the past, there might have been certain pleasurable or certain painful experiences in the past that the mind is holding on to. And now in the present moment, the mind is experiencing discontentedness based on pleasurable things or painful things that the mind is longing, yearning, or clinging to from the past. And the same thing is happening for the future. The unenlightened mind tends to not be able to stay in the present moment. It's either in the past or it's in the future, and there it's longing, yearning through the mind itself as one of the sense bases. So as long as there's craving in the mind, there's going to be certain agreeable things and there's going to be certain disagreeable things. But what you're trying to do is train the mind to eliminate craving, desire, attachment so that it's just contact. It's not either agreeable or disagreeable, but it's just contact. I'll give you an example from my life that prior to learning these teachings and training my mind, there was a certain fruit here in Asia that I thought was horrible. It's called durian. And when I smelled this fruit, I smelled the odor and it smelled like feces to me. It smelled like poop. And on the rare occasions that I put it in the mouth and actually tried to taste this fruit, it had the consistency of poop. And to me, it also tasted like poop as well. Some people absolutely love durian and think it's the best thing ever that they've ever tasted. But for me and other people as well, they tend to not like this particular fruit. And this is because the mind had a certain craving of what the mind was interested in experiencing through the nose and through the tongue. And I tried to avoid this fruit. But the mind still had certain craving. And then when I ate certain foods, I liked those. I thought they were wonderful. And then when the mind tasted certain foods through the tongue, like durian, it was repulsed by it and it pushed it away. Well, slowly but surely, you can train your mind to not have that craving, desire, attachment anymore. You can train your mind that it's not agreeable or disagreeable flavors coming into the tongue to please the mind, because that's oftentimes what we do with food. When we have sensual desire, our tongue is wanting to be pleased so that it can please the mind, right? The mind wants to be pleased, so it's longing and yearning through the tongue. The mind wants agreeable contact with the tongue and having flavors that it agrees with because of certain cravings in the mind. But when you get rid of craving, desire, attachment, then you can pick up a fruit like durian that maybe in one time in the past that you despised and you were repulsed by, and now you can just see it as something to sustain the body. That this durian isn't to please the mind and please the tongue. Instead, it's just food and substance to go into the body in order to nourish the body and keep it healthy. And you can get to the point where you don't have agreeable and disagreeable contact through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, but it's just contact. It's not agreeable or disagreeable to you. It's just contact. And with food, you would need to train the mind that it's just to sustain the body, and you can get to the point where you can eat any and all foods, and it would just be fine, unless you had an allergic reaction or something like that. In each one of these sense bases, the mind is longing, yearning. This is the central desire. This is a pollution of the mind. This is a hindrance. This is something that's going to block you from being able to experience enlightenment. It's an obstruction. So let me give you an example. Say that you are drinking lots of beer or wine or other things like this, and you really enjoy the taste of wine or whiskey or other types of drinks like this. And you realize as part of this path that these substances are causing heedlessness to the mind. And this heedlessness is promoting the pollution in the mind. It's promoting this lack of attentiveness, this lack of awareness or unmindfulness. And if you continue to have sensual desire where you're holding on to the wine or you're holding on to the whiskey or you're holding on to the beer and you're not willing to let it go, then this is going to hinder you from getting to enlightenment, because as you continue to ingest alcoholic substances due to sensual desire of trying to please the senses, then your mind isn't going to be able to eliminate this sensual desire. Your mind is holding on to this particular thing. So you need to get to the point where you see the problem of sensual desire, that you see that it's not just related to alcohol, but it's many different sensual desires or sensual pleasures that the mind is longing, yearning through these sense bases, wanting agreeable contact. And it can only be happy if it gets agreeable contact. And when it has disagreeable contact, then the mind becomes painful. It experiences that sadness, anger, and other discontent feelings. So when you see that this is a core central problem, as the Buddha describes, then you would be interested in implementing the solution. The solution or the remedy is to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. We use breathing, mindfulness, meditation, and generosity to be able to train the mind to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. So if you're in meditation and you're focused on the breath, and each time the mind moves off the breath, you're cutting that off and letting it go and coming back, you're training the mind to let go. You're not training the mind to eliminate thoughts. You're training the mind to arise mindfulness, to arise concentration, and to train the mind to easily let go and come back to the breath. So that now in daily life, when you're out and about, your mind has a better ability to let go, because the unenlightened mind is holding on, craving permanence. So breathing mindfulness meditation 2 or 3 times a day, building up to 30 minutes or more, is what you would need in order to train the mind. And most students need to gradually build up to that. Whether it takes 6 months, a year, or 2 years, perhaps you need to gradually build up where you create more and more space in your life where you're meditating 2 or 3 times a day for 30 minutes or more. You might start out with just 5 minutes for one session, or 2 sessions for 10 or 15 minutes. Wherever you start is where you would start, but you would like to gradually build up your breathing mindfulness meditation practice. And if you've been applying effort in this group learning program over the last 7 months, then you should be building that up slowly but surely. And that's what's going to help you train the mind to have that mindfulness, the concentration, and also to be easily let go. You're not training to eliminate the thoughts. You're training to easily let them go, so that in daily life, you'll be able to let go of any unwholesomeness that arises in the mind. One of those unwholesomeness is the cravings, desires, attachments, the longing, the yearning in the mind for a particular object. Generosity is also doing the same thing. Generosity is the giving and sharing of more than is strictly required in any given situation, without any expectation of anything in return. This is sharing your time, effort, energy, and resources. By sharing, your mind is being trained to let go. Because when there's craving, desire, attachment in the mind tends to be selfish. It tends to hold on to things very tightly. So by you practicing generosity on a continuous, ongoing basis throughout your day, from the middle way, now you will train the mind to let go. So you're not interested in practicing generosity in excess, because then you won't have the basic necessities that you need in order to sustain your own life. But also, if you never practice generosity, the mind would have a tendency to be selfish and self-centered, because your mind is holding on to things and not being willing to give and share. So you'd like to practice the middle way with your generosity, where you're giving and sharing, not just your money, but also your time, your effort, your energy, and your resources. So if you're going into a store, rather than just opening the door and going in, perhaps you hold it for the people behind you without any expectation of anything in return, not expecting even a thank you. Just do it because you know it's the right thing to do. Or if you notice that somebody drops something on the floor, maybe you pick that up and you hand it to them, right? This is generosity. But there's lots of other practices of generosity that you would like to ensure that you're practicing, so that in your daily life, you're regularly practicing generosity, that you're willing to give and share and practice that through your time, effort, energy, and resources. The breathing mindfulness meditation and generosity is what's going to train the mind to eliminate craving, desire, attachment in the central desire. There's other aspects that I talked about back in chapter 12 and 13 about how to eliminate central desire, but generally it's breathing mindfulness meditation and generosity. Then what you're also doing in order to eliminate central desire is you're doing what we call guarding the doorways to discontentedness. The doorways to discontentedness are the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body. Those are the 6 sense spaces. Any kind of discontentedness, whether it's pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, is going to come through these doorways. These 6 doorways is how the mind's going to take in some kind of content, and then it's going to experience conditioned feelings. So you need to guard these doorways. I can give you an example from my life on this. At one point in time, I realized that my mind was attached and craving coffee. And I decided I was going to get rid of coffee out of my life, because the caffeine was causing the mind to be too excited, and I wasn't able to see with mindfulness and clarity of mind what was going on in the mind. So I needed to purge coffee out of my life. And I decided to start doing this. And I could go maybe at first for about a week without a coffee. But then sometimes I would walk past a coffee shop, I would smell the aroma, and I would be right back in there ordering a cup of coffee. or I would maybe go 2 weeks and the same thing. Well, once I realized that the mind was doing this, that it was being drawn in due to the odor, that was an agreeable odor because the mind had a certain craving. Then I started guarding my doorways. As I walked down the street of the city that I live in, I would know that there's a coffee shop coming. Or if I started smelling coffee, I would know like, okay, I'm coming up to a coffee shop. And I would need to guard my doorways. And I would need to understand that this aroma coming in, while it's a nice aroma, it's impermanent and it's not going to lead to lasting satisfaction. It's not going to lead to peacefulness and joy. So I would just keep walking, and that aroma, that odor was impermanent. It only lasted for a few seconds, and then I was past the coffee shop, and I didn't allow my craving to pull me into the coffee shop. So I needed to guard my mind, guarding these doorways of discontentedness with mindfulness or awareness of mind. And that's what you would like to be practicing at all times, so that as you observe these cravings arising, where the mind is longing, yearning, wanting the objects of its affection, that you can restrain the mind and you can pull it back. That's what guarding the doorways of discontentedness will accomplish for you. Then the second hindrance that the Buddha shares is ill will. We referred to this when we talked about the 3 poisons of anger, hatred, and ill will. That's how we described it. The 3 poisons are craving, anger, and ignorance, or the unknowing of true reality. But this particular hindrance, it also shows up as part of the 10 fetters, is referred to as ill will. This is anger, hatred, hostility, bitterness, aggression, resentment, frustration, irritation, annoyance. These will arise in the mind when the mind is experiencing some kind of central desire and it's chasing after what it wants and it doesn't get what it wants. Oftentimes ill will can arise in the mind. This anger, hatred, hostility, bitterness, aggression, resentment, frustration, irritation, or annoyance. And where you see this ill will arising in the mind, where you're wanting to cause harm to others, or maybe you are causing harm to others, you need to take note of that and then start applying the remedy. What the remedy is loving kindness meditation. This is something that I taught in this program. I did a 4-part series on it, and then I've been rotating on Wednesdays between breathing mindfulness meditation and loving kindness meditation. Loving kindness meditation is to transform your mind away from the ill will, from the hostility, from the bitterness or aggression. You're practicing meditation in daily life, but then as you go through your daily life, you're practicing loving kindness through your intentions, your speech, and your actions. So you would like to integrate as part of your overall meditation practice, not only breathing mindfulness meditation, but ensure you have loving kindness meditation in there as well. That's what's going to help you to then be able to practice loving kindness in daily life through your intentions, your speech, and your actions. So moving on to the third hindrance of the 5 hindrances. This is complacency. Complacency is this dullness, this lethargy, this lack of motivation. You might see it referred to in some very old translations of the teachings of the Buddha as sloth and torpor, if you're reading other translations. This is where the mind is dull and lethargic. It's lacking motivation or interest to do something. It's lacking initiative. If you have complacency, meaning you're not interested in reading books, you're not interested in coming to classes, you're not interested in meditating, and you find that you're having this dullness and this lethargy, that you're not even willing to apply your effort and energy towards applying to learn and practice the teachings, then you're going to be hindered in your enlightenment. So as long as the mind is complacent and it's not willing to move from the darkness to the light, you're not going to be able to get to enlightenment. This is going to be an obstruction to you. So you need to overcome this dullness and this lack of motivation by arising the enlightenment factor of investigation, energy, and joy. That's what transforms the mind out of this dull, lethargic state, out of this complacent state, which is exactly the opposite of what the mind's going to want to do when it's complacent. When the mind's complacent, it just wants to sit around and do nothing. It's unmotivated. It isn't interested in applying initiative to doing something. And where you see that occurring, you need to take the mind in the opposite direction, applying right effort to bring the mind out of that complacent state where it's dull and lethargic, lacking motivation, and bring it towards the investigation of the teachings. bring it towards the enlightenment factor of energy where you have a willingness to do something, and arise this joy. Because being complacent and dull and lethargic, it's no fun. If you've experienced that for any length of time, the mind isn't feeling very well in that situation. So the longer you allow the mind to stay in that complacent state, the harder it will be to get it back to the middle where it's practicing this willingness to do something, this initiative, this ambition. So if you're taking a break for a day or two, you've done a lot of work and you need to rest and relax, okay, rest and relax. The mind and the body need that from time to time. But where there's complacency, where you're not interested in reading the book or coming to class or meditating or getting help with the teachings, when you feel that complacency, when you feel that dullness and that lethargy, you're not just relaxing, you're not just resting, but there's this dullness and this lethargy, this lack of motivation. That's where you need to bring the mind out of that with the enlightenment factor of investigation, energy, and joy. And the sooner you catch it, the better. If you allow this complacency to go on for multiple weeks, then it's going to be a lot harder to bring it out of that. But if you go into a period of time where you don't meditate for a day or two or three, and then boom, you get right back into it. Okay, maybe you're just taking a little bit of break for a little while, but don't allow that to become a week or two or three or four, because the longer that you allow the mind to be complacent, the harder it will be to bring it back out of that complacency with these enlightenment factors that we're describing. But it can still happen. You're not stuck in the complacency. The complacency isn't permanent. You'll need to apply the enlightenment factor of investigation, energy, and joy, but just know that it's a lot more challenging the longer you allow that to go on. So that's why your mindfulness is there, to be able to catch the complacency sooner and sooner, and then apply the remedy sooner and sooner, so that you don't just allow the mind to dwell in this dullness and lethargy. Let me know what questions you guys have on these first 3 of the 5 hindrances. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically and ask any question that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions here about these first 3. So let's move on to the next 2, which is the 4th one is restlessness and worry. And then the 5th one is doubt. I'm going to be talking about both of these, helping you understand what they are and what the remedies are. This 4th one, called restlessness and worry. This is where the mind is confused, distracted, having this restless state of mind, and or worried about your own unskillful conduct. If you've ever been sitting somewhere and you've been bobbing your knee up and down, or you've been kind of like tapping with your fingers or tapping a pen continuously, this is because the mind is overactive, it's restless, and now it's coming through the body. The mind is the boss, the body is the employee. So if you're bobbing your knee, or you're tapping your fingers, or tapping a pencil or a pen repetitively, if you look at the mind is overactive in that situation. And that's why your body is doing that action, because there's restlessness in the mind. And this promotes confusion and distraction. There's this restless state of mind because it's overactive. And then sometimes there's this worry that you might experience in the mind as you're starting to learn these teachings, and you understand things like right intention and right speech and right action and right livelihood and others, where you see that you're having missteps or you're having mistakes that you make, and maybe you didn't talk so polite and kind, or maybe you were kind of aggressive with your life partner or your children or your coworkers at work, and maybe you really worry about your unskillful conduct. All of this is going to hinder you from being able to experience enlightenment. So where you see that restlessness and worry, you need to address it. You need to make sure you take action to be able to resolve it. Where you see your mind worrying about your own unskillful conduct, instead, just look at the situation as a learning opportunity, where sometimes you might get very worried and anxious about any particular activity that you're doing, and you might feel like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen to me because I was just aggressive and harsh with my family or my coworkers. Or you might feel like, I'm no good, I can't do this path to enlightenment. So rather than worry about your unskillful conduct, understand that there's going to be this gradual transformation from the unenlightened mind to the enlightened mind, and you're going to have missteps along the way. So you're going to need to notice when you have those missteps and not worry about your unskillful conduct, but just aim to do better. And if you need to apologize to somebody or you need to make amends or something like that, then do that. That's important. That's helpful for you to do. But where you see these missteps, don't allow the mind to worry about what you did, but instead think about it logically about what it is that just transpired and figure out how to clean it up. And if you need help from me, reach out to me and I will help you. And then in terms of the restlessness, what you would like to do is practice the enlightenment factors of tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. That singleness of mind is the concentration. That's what's going to bring the mind out of that restless, overactive state. It'll bring it down into the middle where there's tranquility, concentration, and equanimity, this calmness and composure. So where you observe that the mind is overactive and restless, learn how to arise tranquility, concentration, and equanimity through applying right effort from the Eightfold Path. Then there's this hindrance of doubt. The hindrance of doubt is where an individual has doubt about the teachings and the ability of them to help you attain enlightenment, where one lacks confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, the community, your teacher, and your own ability to attain enlightenment. So what you would like to do is understand that this doubt is normal, that oftentimes when people first get started on the path, and maybe for many months or even longer, maybe even years, somebody might have a certain level of doubt about the teachings. But where you see this doubt arising, you don't just eliminate it through blind belief. That's not how you're going to eliminate the doubt about the teachings. Where you see this doubt about the teachings, which can hinder you from getting to enlightenment if you have this doubt, you would like to instead arise the enlightenment factor of investigation, where you roll up your sleeves and you get involved in investigating the teachings to be able to learn them, reflect on them, and practice the teachings to acquire wisdom. This is what's going to help you to develop your confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, the community, your teacher, and your own ability to train the mind and actually get to enlightenment. So you don't eliminate doubt through just blind belief. You need to apply effort and energy to investigate the teachings. And as you see the improvement to the condition of your mind, you'll eventually get to a point where you'll have no doubt that these teachings are leading to an improved condition of mind. Because if you've investigated them, you've reflected on them, and you've been practicing them to train the mind to include meditation, then you will see more peacefulness and more joy, more calmness coming into the mind. You'll have no doubt that these teachings are leading to your enlightenment. You're not enlightened yet, but you will at least have eliminated any doubt, that you will have confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, the community that you're part of, your teacher that has led you to experience this improved state of mind, and your own ability to attain enlightenment, because you will see that you've been applying effort over a period of 6 months or a year or 2 years, and you will see these gradual improvements to the condition of the mind, that you'll see more focus, concentration, clarity of mind, deeper memory. You'll see your personal, professional relationships start to blossom. You'll see more peacefulness and joy coming into the mind, but only if you're doing the work. If you're not doing the work to apply the effort to practice the teachings, then you're not going to see that improvement. So it starts with investigation. That's what's going to help you to learn, reflect, and then ultimately practice the teachings. So the enlightenment factor of investigation is the remedy to this doubt. As long as you have doubt, you'll be holding back to a certain degree, and it'll be an obstruction or hindrance to you getting to enlightenment. So these are the 5 hindrances that the Buddha talked about there as part of the 5 hindrances. But there's one particular hindrance that is the hindrance of all hindrances. While these 5 talk about the obstructions and the hindrances to a certain level of degree, there's actually a hindrance above all 5 of these that everything really comes back to. That number 1 hindrance is the unknowing of true reality, or ignorance, or delusion, or confusion, or misunderstanding. This is the number 1 hindrance of all hindrances to your enlightenment. This is what's keeping the mind trapped in the unenlightened state, is that it just doesn't understand what it doesn't understand. It lacks wisdom. And when you first get on this path and you start learning things like the 3 universal truths and the 4 noble truths, one of the first things you learn is that your mind is causing its own discontent feelings, the craving, desire, attachment. You start seeing true reality. You start seeing with wisdom that your mind is causing these feelings itself. And this is helping you to arise wisdom and antidote that ignorance. But the mind is ignorant about other things as well. It's lacking this understanding of true reality. It has this unknowing or this lack of wisdom or this confusion or delusion. So understand that that's there all the way until the end, until the mind actually gets to enlightenment. When you fully learned the teachings and you fully implemented all the teachings and you fully transform the mind, that ignorance is going to be there all the way. It's the very last fetter to be eliminated. It's the very last hindrance of all hindrances. These are individual hindrances that you can see arising at different times, and you need to cut them off and eliminate them through these remedies that I'm sharing. But just understand that that ignorance is going to always be there until the very end, where the mind ultimately gets to enlightenment and you're able to fully practice all the teachings and having fully transformed the mind. So you're going to need to learn, reflect, independently verify, and practice. And you're going to need to arise that wisdom to be able to antidote this ignorance or this unknowing of true reality. So whenever you encounter any of these hindrances, whether it's the 5 hindrances or whether it's this ignorance or unknowing of true reality, you're going to need to skillfully work with them in order to eliminate them from the mind. And it's going to be gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. It's not just like doubt rises once and you eliminate it right away just one time. Or it's not like sensual desire arises once and you just eliminate it one time. You're eliminating it multiple times. It's like a wild bush growing in the mind, and you're cutting it back and cutting it back and cutting it back. And it tries to grow some more, and you cut it back and cut it back and cut it back, and it grows some more. And you keep cutting it back until eventually you uproot it out of the mind. You fully uproot this mental object of sensual desire, for example, out of the mind. And it's going to take lots of training to be able to accomplish that with breathing mindfulness, meditation, generosity, and all these other teachings. And as you gradually work towards the improvement to the condition of the mind, you'll see that improvement and you'll know that you're making these transformations. But as you see any of these 5 hindrances arise, understand what the remedy is, apply that, and then experience the improvement to the condition of the mind as a result. So this is everything on the 5 hindrances that I have to share with you. I have one other thing to share with you in more detail, but I would like to pause here and see if you guys have any questions on any of the 5 hindrances before we go into talking about this last topic related to this whole area of the 5 hindrances and the 7 factors of enlightenment. So the way that you can ask questions is put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions here, so let's move on to this last topic that I was planning to discuss with you guys as it relates to these 5 hindrances in your journey to enlightenment. We've talked about this in other classes, but here I would like to just really focus on it again as a last reminder as we're ending this group learning program and getting ready to restart, which is understanding right mindfulness. I taught this back in chapter 5, and I taught it at the very beginning of the program as well when we were doing those 3-part series in the Eightfold Path, because right mindfulness is so important. Without right mindfulness, you wouldn't be aware when the 5 hindrances are arising. Without right mindfulness, you wouldn't be aware when craving, desire, attachment is arising, or anger, hatred, and ill will, or any of these other unwholesome qualities like the ego or arrogance or boastfulness. Right mindfulness is utterly important. It should be practiced all the time, not only in meditation, but in daily life as well. So what right mindfulness is having this understanding to be able to observe the mind and be able to have this awareness of the mind. So you need to have this general awareness of the mind. And that's the way I teach it when students are first getting started, is to have just awareness of mind. But if you've been meditating and you've been practicing awareness of mind in daily life for a period of time now, Now it's important for you to understand the four foundations of mindfulness, because this is what you ultimately need to get to understand and practice to be able to train the mind to eliminate these five hindrances, but also to eliminate the 10 fetters and all the other unwholesome qualities that are in the mind. What you need to understand about the four foundations of mindfulness is that there's these four things that you're going to experience. There's the bodily sensations associated with discontentedness arising. Then there's going to be a feeling that comes into the mind. Then that feeling is going to affect the condition of the mind. And then it's going to feed a mental object. So for example, if you have craving in the mind, wanting to see something agreeable, or you have a craving in the mind to hear something agreeable, or smell something, or taste something, or have some bodily contact, or some mental activity, and the mind is having this craving, desire, attachment. Well, when you get your craving, there's going to be pleasant feelings that are going to start to arise. Or if you don't get your craving fulfilled, there's going to be painful feelings that are starting to arise. But before they arise as feelings, there's going to be some bodily sensation. With something like anger, for example, you might feel tingling in the body, you might feel heat in your face, you might feel pressure in the skull. This is the bodily sensations associated with the arising of anger or frustration. Or if you're shy, you might feel queasiness in the stomach. There's going to be some bodily sensation associated with each feeling that is starting to arise. The feeling hasn't come into the mind yet. There's just this precursor of the bodily sensations that is alerting you that some discontentedness is about to arise. And what you would like to do is cut off and let go of the discontent feeling as a bodily sensation before it becomes a feeling in the mind. If you miss it as a bodily sensation, or you're unable to cut it off for any reason, then it's going to become a feeling. Now the mind is angry, right? You missed it as a bodily sensation. Now the mind has just experienced anger. Well, you can cut it off and let it go there as well. If you don't cut it off as a feeling, then it's going to start to affect the condition of the mind. This is where you might have been angry for several hours or several days or maybe even a week or two. This is because you didn't cut it off as a bodily sensation or even aware that that's what you needed to do. You weren't aware of the feeling and knowing that you needed to cut off the feeling, and then it affected the condition of your mind more long term for hours or days or maybe a week or two. And if you don't cut it off and eliminate it as the condition of mind, it's going to feed the mental object. What a mental object is a deeply rooted container that's in the mind. And in this example, it's ill will, which is a fetter and is also a hindrance. This is a deeply rooted container in the mind that is going to continue to get fed as long as you keep allowing the discontentedness to arise. You're going to keep feeding this container of ill will, and it's going to get more and more deeply rooted in the mind. So what you would like to do is prevent the conditioned feelings from arising by catching them as a bodily sensation and cutting them off and letting them go. You're trying to prevent the mind from experiencing conditioned feelings like pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. But remember, these are conditioned feelings. So those pleasant feelings are things like the happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, euphoria, based on some condition. That, oh, it's sunny outside, so I'm going to be so excited. Well, if you allow that conditioned feeling to be experienced as a pleasant feeling, now when the condition changes and it's no longer sunny outside, it's raining, now you're going to be angry, or you're going to be frustrated, or you're going to be irritated or annoyed, because the conditioned feeling is not permanent, because you're basing your inner feelings on some condition like the sun. And because the sun is impermanent, your feeling of happiness is going to be impermanent as well. So the mind's going to move to the sadness or frustration or something else. So you're not interested in allowing the mind to experience conditioned feelings, because as long as it keeps doing that, you're opening yourself up to discontentedness. You need to get to the point where you restrain the mind so that you can get to these unconditioned mental qualities of peace, calm, serenity, contentedness with joy. So if you're aware with mindfulness, having this awareness of mind, and you notice this bodily sensation arising, based on some craving, that you're having this conditioned feeling that's about to come into the mind. It hasn't come into the mind yet, but you notice the bodily sensation, either associated with pleasant feelings, painful feelings, or neither painful nor pleasant. Then you would like to cut it off and let it go there. But if you can't for any reason, because as your mind is in transition, you're not going to be able to easily cut it off as a bodily sensation. But more and more as you train in meditation, you will be able to. And then you'll be able to practice it in daily life. But if that becomes a feeling in the mind, try to cut it off there. You're trying to redirect the mind. You might need to take it in the opposite direction. So like when I would walk past the coffee shop, sometimes I would just stay focused and look straight ahead and I would just walk. Or sometimes I would cross the street and go to the other side until I gained control of the mind. And then when I had control of the mind, I didn't have to do that anymore. I was able to redirect the mind for a period of time, distancing myself from the coffee. But then more and more I gained control of the mind, and I'm able to now even sit in a coffee shop, have conversations with students and things like this, and I'm not tempted to buy a cup of coffee whatsoever because I know the harm that that's causing to my mind and to the body, so I don't do that. So while you're gaining this control of the mind, you're going to sometimes be able to cut it off as a bodily sensation, but sometimes it's going to become a feeling, and that's where you still should take the effort to cut it off. And if you need to redirect the mind, then do that. Then if you noticing that you're having the condition of the mind being affected for several hours or days, you need to cut that off and let that go as well so that you're not feeding these mental objects. So you're essentially putting this blockade on the bodily sensations and trying to cut off more and more at the bodily sensations so that now the mind can be free and it can be liberated. And eventually you'll get to the point where the cravings are no longer in the mind and there won't be any bodily sensations arising associated with discontentedness because you will have eliminated all the cravings in the mind. But in order to transform the mind to this point, you need to be aware of these bodily sensations. Essentially what you're doing is it's like taking a boat from maybe Canada to the UK. If you're out in the middle of the ocean, you would like to prevent the water from ever coming into the boat, because once the water comes into the boat, you've got a real problem to deal with. You've got to get this water out of the boat or you're going to sink. So the same thing is if you allow the conditioned feeling to come into the mind, then you've got a real problem to deal with because now the mind is angry and it's going to start affecting the condition of the mind and feeding these mental objects. So if you can prevent that conditioned feeling by cutting off and letting go at the bodily sensations, then you've protected the mind, you've guarded the mind, you've guarded those doorways to discontentedness, and now the mind doesn't experience that conditioned feeling. And then more and more, as you eliminate the cravings in the mind, you won't experience the arising of discontentedness. You'll still have bodily sensations associated with somebody touching you or you touching the body or some clothing touching the body, but you won't have bodily sensations associated with discontentedness. So that tingling of the anger or the heat in the face or the pressure in the skull, that'll all be gone because you won't have cravings, desires, attachments that are producing the discontentedness to start to arise. So you'll be able to restrain the mind through eliminating those cravings. You won't experience the arising of discontentedness any longer. So this is all detailed in Volume 1, Chapter 5, and we discuss this at different times in this program, but it's important for you to practice this in meditation, developing that awareness of mind, and then practice it in daily life so that you can understand and practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness, because that's what's going to give you the awareness to know when these hindrances are arising, or when the fetters are arising, or when craving, desire, attachment is arising, when anger is arising. Is mindfulness is what's going to help you to accomplish that. So let me see what questions you guys might have on this particular topic. This is everything that I plan to discuss with you guys today. So if you guys have any questions related to this particular topic or anything related to anything we've been discussing as part of this group learning program, you can ask those questions through Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, and I will answer your question for you. Okay, it looks like Francis has a question here in Zoom. If you'd like to unmute Francis, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the time. Okay, I have a question about the last part on the four foundation of mindfulness. I know of this thing through that you practice the breathing method of long and short, and all the way the body of the breath and all that. But this is a different way of looking at the four foundation of mindfulness, which is more simpler to understand. So if there a relationship between the meditation method of the long and short breath and all that and this one?
So, in breathing mindfulness meditation, that's where you're cultivating the mindfulness. You don't need to practice long and short breathing during breathing mindfulness meditation. What the Buddha is describing there to you when he talks about long breath and short breath is he's talking about be aware of the breath. Bring your awareness to the breath. Bring your focus and concentration to the breath. So, if you breathe long, know that you breathe long. If you breathe short, know that you breathe short. So bring your awareness to the breath and focus the mind on the breath. And then whenever the mind goes off the breath, you cut that off and let it go. So when your mind is on the breath, you're practicing mindfulness or awareness of mind, and you're practicing concentration focused on a single object. And when the mind moves off the breath and you cut that off and bring it back, you're practicing to restrain the mind. You're practicing to let go of whatever the mind is moving off the breath with. So when you bring the mind back, that's helping you to eliminate the craving, desire, attachment. That's what's helping you to develop that awareness of mind so that now in daily life, you can be aware of the bodily sensations, the feelings, the condition of the mind, and the mental objects.
Actually, I find that the what I've been taught about this long and short meditation method, I find it very mechanical for me, and at the end of the day, I get a headache. Too much of thinking in my brain and all that, yeah. So when I switch on to your method recently, I'm aware of it's long and I'm aware it's short and all that, and I'm aware that I'm going through the whole body of the breath. I just know it, but I don't focus my thought that, oh, I'm now breathing long, I'm now breathing short. So I have a breakthrough on that one.
Yes. So there's a lot of misinformation out there about the teachings of the Buddha, and people are sharing all kinds of different things, and they're oftentimes not even learning with the original words of the Buddha. And you have your own direct experience to see the truth. When you notice that somebody has taught you something and it's creating a lot of overactivity in the mind and you're not able to focus and stay concentrated, that's the truth for you to see that that's not how the Buddha taught to meditate. Because when your mind is overactive, that is exactly opposite of what he's teaching you to do in meditation and outside of meditation. So if somebody's introduced you to something and you've been practicing it and you notice that the mind is overactive, you should set that stuff aside because it's not working. I can tell you with 100% certainty, and I can show you in the suttas if you want, but I know through my own direct experience that what is in the suttas or the discourses of the Buddha is 100% accurate, that he teaches to focus on the breath, and whenever the mind moves off the breath, you cut it off and let it go and you come back. And what he also describes in those discourses, where he talks about focusing on the breath, is he talks about calming the mental activity. So there's nothing with the mind that you're doing in meditation other than focus on the breath. You just stay focused on the sound of the breath or the sensation of air coming into the nose. And wherever you notice that the mind is moved off, you just cut that off and bring it back. You don't think about it, you don't observe it, you don't label it, you don't judge the thought, you don't analyze it, you don't try to figure out where it's coming from. Just whenever you notice that the mind is not on the breath, cut it off and let it go and come back. You should be calming the mental activity. So if they're doing something where the mind is being active, where you're having to repetitively think, long and short and all these other things, that's exactly opposite of what the Buddha taught, that he's teaching you to calm the mental activity. And he does that by having you focus on the breath, and when the mind moves off, to cut it off and bring the mind back to the breath. It's really that simple. A lot of people have complicated the meditations that the Buddha teaches, but it's very simple the way that he teaches it. And that's why the average common person can learn it, and then you'll see that it actually works for you.
Okay, thank you so much, David. I got it now. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome, Francis. All right, let me see if there's any other questions here. It looks like somebody saying hello from Puerto Rico. Hello. That must be Mike, it sounds like. Nice to see you guys online. Let's see if we have any questions in Facebook. I don't see any there. So what I'll do then is I'll just end class here by sharing with you that our last class of this group learning program, at least this iteration of the group learning program, is going to be on Wednesday. This is our last Sunday class, and I'd like to just take a moment to thank all of you for whatever amount of time, effort, energy, and resources that you've put into learning and practicing the teachings of the Buddha over the last 7 months. If you've dedicated any amount of time to learning in these classes or reading books or listening to the audiobooks or the videos or the replays, the podcast, seeking personal guidance with me, meditating, anything and anything that you've been doing in order to train your mind, I would like you to know that I deeply respect and deeply admire people who take the time to do this inner work, because this inner work is quite challenging to heal from what hurt you so that you never need to hurt again. So I'd like to thank you, because it's helping you, it's helping those close to you, and it's helping all of humanity. So thank you for your dedication to learning and practicing these teachings. And if you've been consistent throughout this program, it's a really wonderful thing for you, those close to you, and all of humanity, because you're helping to reduce the harm that you're causing in the world, and you should start seeing more and more progress as you continue forward. I would also like to thank anybody who's made any kind of offering to me in terms of time, effort, energy, or resources in order to continue to share the teachings, whether that's donations of money or support or food. Some students will buy me food sometimes. Some students will make offerings of money to help me pay for the various things that I need to pay for. And I send out a message on Facebook each month to thank those individual people who have shared their resources with me to be able to share these teachings. But here at the end of this program, I would like to give just an extra special thank you to anybody and everybody who's shared any kind of offerings with me through practicing generosity to create merit over the last 7 months. I really deeply appreciate any kind of generosity or offerings that you've shared with me, because this helps me and allows me to continue to share these teachings with others. And then another thing I would like to share with you is that if you would like to continue on in this program, I'm going to be restarting it on Sunday, a week from today. I'm going to be starting from the very beginning of the group learning program, and I'm going to go all the way through again for the 7-month period. This will be the 7th time that I've done this group learning program. This is the end of the 6th time. So if you'd like to repeat it, you're more than welcome to repeat it, because each time you learn, you're going to perhaps learn new things. The first time through, maybe you were trying to get your bearings, maybe there were certain challenges that you experienced along the way, but now maybe a second time through, you'll hear things a bit differently than you did the first time. There'll be a bit more pollution that has been lifted out of the mind. So this time you might be able to retain more of the teachings on a second time through. If you try to do that, or if you decide that that's what you would like to do, that's up to you. You're more than welcome to do that. I just share it with you as a recommendation, as an option. Some people might move from this program into the Pali Canon and English study group, and that's the way you might see your progression. Some people might do both programs at the same time, the group learning program and the Pali Canon and English study group. Whatever you choose to do, that's the right choice. But these are the options for you, is that you could move into the group learning program and do that again. You could move into the Pali Canon and English study group and start that from right now when we're in volume 6, or you could do both at the same time. These are all options for you. And then as you go forward, understand that there's going to be continued classes to help you continue to learn. You're always welcome to reach out to me, whether it's through classes, courses, or retreats that I teach online or here in Thailand at the temple, whether you'd like to schedule personal guidance with me through online learning by connecting into Zoom, or if you'd like to meet with me privately here in Chiang Mai or anywhere else that I'm traveling in the world, I'm available to help you to progress towards enlightenment. But you're the one who's responsible for your own journey and your own growth. So as you decide that you need help, feel free to reach out, and I'm here to help you and guide you along this path. But it's up to you to decide what it is that you need to learn and what's your next steps. I can give you guidance, I can give you thoughts, I can give you suggestions, but the decision is always yours. It's your own independent journey to enlightenment, and I'm kind of like a tour guide. I'm the one who's pointing out the areas of the things that you need to learn and providing you the resources and the teachings to learn, and making myself available through classes, courses, retreats, and personal guidance. But it's you that needs to decide that you're going to pick up the book, or you're going to come to class, or you're going to meditate, or any other aspect of progressing on this path. So as you feel that you need help and that I'm a person that can help you, feel free to reach out for guidance, and I'm here to help you. So thank you all for joining for today's class. Perhaps I'll see you guys in the next group learning program, or in the Pali Canon English study group, or in a particular class or course or retreat here in Chiang Mai or somewhere else around the world. It's been lovely to share these teachings with you, and perhaps you might decide that this is something that you would like to continue with and develop your practice so that you can completely eliminate discontentedness. Because by the time you get to enlightenment and you've completely eliminated discontentedness, no matter how much time and effort it's taken you to be able to get to that point, whether it's 2 years or 20 years, you will be so pleased that you dedicated whatever amount of time it took to get to that enlightened mental state, because your mind can be peaceful and joyful for the rest of this life. Your personal and professional relationships can grow and blossom. You won't have any irritability or any roughness or resentment in any of your relationships whatsoever. You'll always be in a good mood. You will never experience even the slightest displeasure or ickiness in the mind by the time you get to the enlightened mental state. And if I've been able to help you do that, I'm very pleased to have been able to do that, and I'm willing to help you continue forward on this journey. You just decide to reach out, and I'm here to help you. So we'll see you in one of these future classes. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Sawadee khap.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.